Hello and welcome back, all my budget gamers. Today we're going to be looking at the i7-6900K, easily the best named CPU ever released, and going over two very compelling reasons why you should absolutely not be buying one right now. The i7-6900K is a truly legendary processor, not only for its kinda nice product name, but for its impressive and long-lived specs. It's an 8-core, 16-thread Broadwell chip with a 3.2 GHz base clock, and when using Intel's TBT 3.0, it has an impressive 4 GHz turbo clock, making it more than enough CPU to still be limited by even modern mid-range GPUs. To answer the rhetorical in the channel name, yeah, this thing absolutely and unequivocally does game. With a matched set of 4 basic DDR4 UDIMMs, it can even be tossed into a compatible cheap second-hand workstation for a budget gaming build, which is what we'll be doing here with the Dell Precision T5810. But at current market prices, near the $130 mark at the time of recording, no one should be considering this. And that's because these Broadwell Xeons exist, the pair of which, combined, will run less than a single 6900K. The first challenger up is the E5-1650v4. It's a 6-core 12-threaded chip with a 3.6 GHz base clock and a 4 GHz turbo. This is just an i7-6850K wearing a disguise, and at a current market price of about $35, this is a steal of a CPU. The second of the pair is the big sibling, the E5-1660v4, which is an 8-core 16-thread CPU with a 3.2 GHz base clock and a 3.8 GHz boost clock, which sounds like it might just be a downclocked version of the 6900K, because it is. And when I say that it is the same as the i7 analog, I don't mean it's very similar, I mean it is literally the same piece of silicon under the IHS. The only difference between this Xeon and the 6900K is a locked multiplier and how Intel's TBT 3.0 handles the single-core boosts. Oh, and there's the added benefit that these Xeons can run ECC RDIMMs, which are half the price of the UDIMMs, meaningfully cutting the cost of the full system. However, paper specs are not what we care about, so let's see some benchmarks. Quick side note here, all testing is conducted with 32 gigs of the fastest corresponding quad-channel RAM for each CPU, that's a verbal asterisk you should definitely remember, and all of the testing was done with this undervolted PowerColor 5700 XT, running with the specs on screen. Testing for everything was done at 1080p, lowest settings unless explicitly noted. So do the Xeons game. Starting off with Cinebench, even though it isn't a game, every gamer runs it, and here the 6900K comes out swinging. Though it isn't a rout, the 1650 matches it in single-core performance, and the 1660 is within spitting distance for multi-core. Still, chalk one up for the 6900K. Moving on to real gaming, first on the slate is CSGO, a title that is well known for its dependence on single-core performance. And yet, despite a win in Cinebench, the 6900K lags well behind here, coming in almost 40 FPS behind the cheapest CPU in the lot. It's a surprise upset straight away, seeing the i7 get dusted by both Xeons in average frame rate and 1% lows. Next, we're turning to Fortnite using DX12, where both single and multi-core performance can come into play. And again, the 6900K gets upset by both Xeons, trailing the 1660 by over 10% in average frame rate. It does notably triumph in 1% lows, but not really enough to offset the 30 FPS disadvantage in average. 2 losses in a row here, and we're dangerously close to forming a pattern. In Apex Legends now, using the older DX11 mode instead of the DX12 beta, running at 900p low instead of 1080p, the 1660 wins this one very narrowly, with the 1650 coming in second and the 6900 within margin of error of that, although it does, once more, come through as the victor in 1% lows. This result isn't the most meaningful though, simply because of the 300 FPS cap on the engine in this game. I guess call this one a draw? Shadow of the Tomb Raider in DX12 is a return to form, with the multi-core strength of the 1660 putting it about 4.5% of its little brother Xeon and the i7. Here, however, the 1660 also ekes out a win in 1% lows. Far Cry 5 chalks up a narrow victory for the 1650, its second overall, and piles it on for the 6900K, which racks up its 5th bronze medal out of 5 runs so far. The gap here is extremely small, and with all three CPUs pushing over 100 FPS and keeping the 1% lows entirely playable, this isn't the biggest difference you could see. However, it's definitely a pattern. Borderlands 3 using DX12 is more disappointment for the i7, with the 1660 pulling out another win of nearly 5%, solidly eclipsing its consumer market sibling. And lastly, Horizon Zero Dawn delivers a killing blow to the idea of using the 6900K in an X99 workstation and turning it up to 11. The silver lining, though, is that through its performance failures, we've actually found it's possible to get better performance on the same platform for a heap less money. If you remember that verbal asterisk earlier, with each system using the fastest RAM available to it, that asterisk turns out to be pretty big. Although all the RAM in testing is labeled to 2400 MHz, on the UDIMMs for the 6900K, it's also clearly labeled an XMP profile. Enterprise workstations, however, rarely if ever have any way of enabling XMP, and instead only boot JEDEC spec. In contrast, the less expensive Samsung RDIMMs paired with the Xeons have a default JEDEC profile of 2400 MHz, giving them a 12.5% increase in system memory bandwidth that ends up being the source of our performance discrepancy. With that, as we then turn to some Apex footage, it's time to conclude that this may have actually been consumer advice here, which does feel a little bit weird. Anyway, thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and we'll see you all in the next one.